What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel, and today we have another post-reaction video talking about something that the devs have posted about the game. Almost a week ago, Ghost Ship released this below decks post talking about cave generation for Deep Rock Galactic, and I know I'm a little bit behind about talking about this, but being out of town for the weekend and the most recent launch of Space Marine 2 has kind of made me get a little bit distracted, but I have been wanting to look at this beefy article post and look at what they are talking about, as cave generation is a very interesting and crucial part of Deep Rock Galactic as a game, so learning as much as we possibly can about it is always a nice thing. So if you guys are ready, let's go through this below decks post talking about cave generation in Deep Rock Galactic, and if we can learn anything that we maybe didn't know before. By the way, if you like this video and want to see more, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss another upload. Hello miners, we've got another behind the scenes peek for you, this time on one of your most requested topics, cave generation. Let's explore how the caves of Hoxus get formed thousands of times over again, every single day. Hope you like it. Planting a cave seed. The moment you select a mission in Deep Rock Galactic, a cave is born. Out in some invisible abstract, the game generates a seed. This is a procedurally generated string of numbers containing the instructions for a brand new cave system. This random number decides what the caverns will look like, where you'll find mineral deposits, and which fiends await you within. All of this is determined in a fraction of a second, flash generated when you lock in a mission. So this is actually something that I have always kind of been a little bit curious about. I always assumed that the caves generated when you first loaded into the mission itself. But here they're kind of confirming that the mission is actually generated when you first select the mission. So I guess in essence, if you select one mission and then immediately select a different one, you will generate a completely new cave setup just by selecting a different mission in the actual space rig terminal itself. This new cave is entirely unique. There are many like it, but this one is yours. Caves, or more specifically, procedurally generated caves, are what define Deep Rock Galactic. They set the stage for the action, giving life and lore to the game. They're what make each dwarf's traversal tools relevant, enabling each class function and identity. And the game owes a great deal of its replayability to the limitless pool of possible caves to explore. So how does it all work? Let's dig into it. So yeah, that is a very important part. The fact that it is procedurally generated caves, and you really don't get two cave structures that are exactly the same unless you've played hundreds upon thousands of games. Pretty much every time you go into the caves, regardless of what biome you're in, you're going to be getting a new layout, which is always something that has been interesting to me in the game, and I'm sure a lot of people really enjoy that aspect about it. And the fact that there are so many linking types of corridors and unique generations to particular caves, it has always been interesting to see how it kind of works and how those caves are created, and now we're getting a much bigger look into it. Cave generation in a nutshell. Your cave seed gets generated right when you select a mission, but the actual cave comes together once you hop into the drop pod. Okay, so that actually kind of completely negates what I just said earlier. Great. As you hurtle towards Hoxus, the cave generator really gets to work. Cave systems come together like pearls on a string, one room at a time, connected by narrow, winding tunnels. While the overall cave system is a unique result of random generation, the individual cave rooms are handcrafted. If you imagine the cave generator is our automated chef, we still want real people to make sure it's cooking with high quality ingredients. There are over 100 cave room templates to pick from, but many of these templates also contain multiple internal randomizer variants. So spawning the same template 20 different times would still produce 20 unique rooms. That's some crazy numbers kind of right there. I knew that there were a lot of different room templates that they had when creating caves. I didn't think there were over 100. And the fact that even within those particular base templates, there are other factors and randomizers that go into it even beyond just the basic shape of the caves is kind of crazy, and something you don't really think about too much. Depending on the mission type, length, and difficulty, these room templates could get warped, mirrored, or overlapped as the cave generator strings them together. On-site refinery missions, for example, mash multiple rooms into one massive cavern. This is why you're likely to see huge herds of loot bugs during these missions, because the entire cave's population all gets spawned at the same point. That makes a lot of sense and kind of solves the mystery that I've been having for a long time as to why loot bugs are so prevalent on on-site refining missions, and it kind of makes sense. If you're on, say, a mining expedition or a escort duty mission where those are kind of long linear based missions, the loot bugs will spawn consistently throughout those cave systems and throughout the entire way that you go, because you have a much wider area coverage to go through as you progress through the actual mission. But in something like on-site refinery missions, all of the rooms are clustered together and clumped into one gigantic amalgamation of a room, so the game has to load all the population of the loot bugs into one specific space, which would then make sense as to why there's so many of them. But to understand how this generation really works, we need to take a closer look at one of these cave room templates. And then they showed a screenshot of what looks like, as they describe, either a cave room template or a Windows 98 screensaver. There's no way to be sure. And this is what I'm imagining is what looks like when certain cave generations spawn. Based on the way this looks, this probably, at least to me, appears to be potentially an on-site refining cave generation like they mentioned earlier, as there's a lot of overlapping rooms that are kind of mashed together. And it seems to be very sort of central and larger in the center with a couple of branching patterns that don't really lead anywhere. But this is just basically a way for us to view and see the actual generation process of the caves as to how they work. And it's very interesting to see this particular aspect done in a sort of actual computation style effect. It kind of puts everything into perspective that all of those lines that we're seeing are cave walls or cave paths that we are going to eventually be going through. And the next section of the post seems to sort of describe what we're looking at with this particular image. In focus, how a cave room template works. Every cave room template is composed of interesting spheres, half spheres, and flat planes. This cluster of shapes tells the cave generation engine what sort of volume to carve out of the solid rock, creating the rooms where each mission takes place. The image above, which is the image that you guys are seeing on screen right now, is the template for a cave room. It is the instructions that the procedural generator uses to create a unique cavern. Here's what you are looking at. Green and yellow lines. These lines determine the general shape of the room. The yellow lines act as the outer boundary, the base layer upon which the cave generator applies noises like textured surfaces and biospecific rock patterns. The green lines are the inner boundary, limiting how far this noise is allowed to fluctuate and push into the space itself. Smaller orange orbs. You can see these clustered in the center, surrounded by an outer yellow wireframe. These act as randomizer elements that mark spaces that might either be hollowed out to create extra volume or filled in with a random protruding rock formation. When this cave room is created, each of these has a random chance to be activated or not. This way, each individual room can have an even greater degree of unique and unpredictable variety. Medium orange half spheres. These half domes seen around the outer perimeter of the cave room mark potential exit paths for the room. In-game, these are the areas filled with compacted dirt. The cave generator engine uses these as nodes to link the rooms to the rest of the cave system via tunnels. Orange wireframe globe. The orange sphere in the background limits the size of the cavern. In the game, various cavern templates are sorted by different sizes. If the template in question pushes beyond the orange globe, we've got to either recategorize its size or cut it down to fit the globe. So that kind of puts this picture into a much bigger sense of scale and clarity, because we can kind of see exactly what it is that each of these particular lines kind of represents a lot more. And it really makes you appreciate the level of detail and care that goes into these particular cave generations. The fact that they have a specific focus as to where individual elements of the cave actually function and fit into the template itself, to the point where you will have certain cave protrusions or not in various sections, is very impressive that they were able to put this kind of detail into something that is essentially working completely randomly. For comparison, directly below, which is the picture that you guys are going to see on screen right now, is the same cavern template once it's been fed through the procedural generator and rendered in the game. This one template has dozens of possible major iterations that would never look quite the same if we loaded it again. So this gives us an even better understanding of what they're talking about with all of the elements that they mentioned in the last section regarding the wireframes, the randomizer elements, the cave end generations. It kind of makes all of it look a little bit more like something that we would see in an actual mission, which is the overall point. And it's crazy to me that this cave system looks incredibly unique in terms of the way that the game is rendering it out and is computating it, but this also just looks like a cave system that I've probably seen before in one of my caves. However, slightly different because of the way that the randomized elements happen. And then they included another picture that includes what appears to be a earlier version of the cave generation and tunnel system that they had, which had a much simpler wireframe. And here you can get a little bit of a better idea of how the cave is laid out. Obviously, as you can see, does not have nearly as many different random elements applied to it. What makes a cave fun? While the computer brain is great at randomly stitching a cave system together, it's not so good at deciding what sort of cave is actually fun to play. That's why we have human brains in charge of that part. Anders Heindorf Fredrickson, I'm so sorry if I mispronounced your name, Anders, senior game designer at Ghost Ship Games, has been the human brain and complete human person designing the cave rooms since Season 3. In his words, he makes the building blocks that feed into the cave generator. He's the one putting together the cave wireframes like we just looked at above. As he sees it, there are a few key considerations in making a good cave: traversal, natural wayfinding, and dramatic experience. A cave should require players to carve out terrain and use the traversal tools to get around, but it shouldn't feel like a maze. While larger cave systems can get a little labyrinthine, individual rooms should still feel intuitive, with their shapes funneling players through to the next exit point. It's about balance. Not so simple that it gets boring, but not so complex that it feels punishing. On top of that, a cave room should just seem cool. That one comes down to gut feeling. So I definitely think that the three factors at play when designing cave systems, traversal, natural wayfinding, and dramatic experience, are definitely things that make traversal and Deep Rock throughout the cave systems that you go through very enjoyable. The fact that every single class's traversal tool is useful in very unique and distinct ways, and there are situations where all of them can be incredibly viable to help you get through just some strange terrain that you can't really quite get around, or just this random pocket of this cavern that you just need to cross where you might need the gunner's zip line, or there's just a random wall that you can't get through that the driller could cut through very easily. That sense of all of the classes being viable in terms of being able to traverse caves is definitely well done. And the cool factor definitely comes into play, especially once you start getting into the specific biome flora and fauna that exist, which I'm sure they'll get into a little bit later, where in which the caves just kind of have their own sort of feel to them, where you can get these massive rooms that just have a bunch of enemies and different random points, crystals, plants, resources. You can just enter certain rooms and just think to yourself, wow, this is a very intense room to go into. However, Anders can't guarantee all of this by hand sculpting it. He's still got to make the design decisions that can withstand random variation from the cave generator. Quote, "Once I make a new room, I'll load it in and play it a bunch of times with Scout, then Driller, and so on. Sometimes I play through it and it really sucks. Then I've got to figure out what doesn't work and why." He says, "It might be that the visibility's bad or the room is basically unplayable as some classes. I can only set the framework for the space before the generator gives its own spin on it, so there's a lot of trial and error." So then they showcased a couple of screenshots from the early days of Deep Rock development, showing some experimental room generation and shaping and textures, and some of them look really interesting, even though this was well early into Deep Rock's development before it was in any sort of playable state. It still kind of has that sort of graphic-y, pixely type vibe to it that everybody knows and loves about Deep Rock, and these caves still do look like things that we have seen in the stretch of Deep Rock now, so we can see that the room generation process has improved, but it's still more or less the same since it has been at its early days. And accompanied with that are several sketches from different sort of styles of cave systems, which some of them we have seen in games so far, and some of them seem to have been a little bit more cut. And it just shows that there is a wide variety of different cave systems that you can go into that have their own unique sort of feel to them. Some claustrophobic, some more open, some more organic, some more sort of constructed. And there's definitely a lot of variability in terms of both this and the other previous images in terms of how well the cave generation can really work. Biomes furnishing the caves. Once we've got a cave all shaped and laid out, it needs the noise and debris. Noise is the technical term for shaping the cave's walls, ceilings, and floors. Basically, it's about taking the perfect spherical shape of the cave framework and crumpling those surfaces into something more interesting and rock-like. Debris refers to the process of sprinkling in assets like smaller rock formations, cobwebs, hazards, and the flora and fauna unique to the selected biome. Every biome has its own distinct patterns of noises and debris. Robert Friss, studio art director and co-founder of Ghost Ship Games, and also the voice of Mission Control, began working on different biomes just a few months into the game's development. As he sees it, Hox's different biomes are an essential dimension of the game's procedural generation. Firstly, they gave a lot of character to the planet of Hoxus, but it's also a big way for us to boost the gameplay's replayability, he says. The exact same level will look and play differently depending on which biome is then added on top. It determines the enemies and interactive hazards you'll meet. Things like fog and lighting can be completely different. Even the shapes of the caves themselves will be different, and it's then up to the player to figure out how to navigate it. So as I said previously, a lot of what makes the caves so fun and enjoyable to go through, especially multiple times, is the difference between the different biomes that you have and the kinds of hazards that you will go through depending on which one you're on. And they're so ridiculously unique to the point where you have people who like certain biomes more than others, and certain biomes just feel naturally a lot more punishing to go through. The fungus bogs, for example, is one that I will be on record saying that I think is one of the most difficult ones, and I still stand by that because the hazards are just very annoying. They're very prominent, and ultimately the biome itself just has this very foul and difficult even just feel to it, even in just the topography, the type of flora and fauna that exist, and the kinds of things that you'll go through there. And you compare that with something like, say, sandblasted corridors, which feels completely different in many different ways, both in terms of just the way that the terrain functions, to the hazards, to the types of unique enemies that you come across. It's very clear that they put a lot of time and effort into the different biomes, that they want to make sure that they all feel different, especially when going through them multiple times. Your selected biome tells the procedural generator how to sculpt the cave's surfaces and how to populate it with flora and fauna. Each biome has a distinctive texture palette. Magma Core, for example, applies sharp, rigid ceilings and craggy, jagged edges to most of the surfaces. Sandblasted Corridors, by contrast, is appropriately smoothed, eroded, and sparse. Nobody at Ghost Ship Games is a professional geologist, so most aesthetic choices here come down to what looks and feels cool. Toxis' biome draws from real-world caves as well as fiction. Areas like salt pits, glacial strata, or even crystalline caverns resemble something that you might find on Earth, while biomes like the Azure Weald reflects inspiration from the luminous landscapes of Avatar. In essence, you could view biomes as the finishing touches department cave generation. If the wireframe structure decides the shape of the cave, the noise and debris are the wallpaper and furnishings. So then they show us a couple of images talking about the early versions of the game's experimental sort of blockier style terrain system, where it starts off, very, very smooth, very rigid, and then by varying degrees of smoothing out, tessellation, and adding in the extra noise and debris that they were talking about, you get cave systems that feel significantly more organic and like they are in some sort of underground location. It's very interesting to see how we can go from something that looks like it is rendered directly in a computer to something that does look a lot more natural, more smooth, and have a lot more of a actual cave-like structure to it. And it's very clear to see the evolution from the early stages of the game's production to what we currently have now. New caves tomorrow and forever. There's some statistic out there about how you can connect 6 standard Lego bricks in about 1 billion different ways. You might think about Deep Rock Galactic's procedural cave generators as working in a very similar way. But instead of 6 bricks, you got a pool of 119 handcrafted rooms and 10 biomes to pick from. Plus, it can warp and tweak and overlap all of these elements before snapping them together. The Infinite Cave engine runs around the clock, day in and day out, 365 days a year. On an average day, the cave generator produces about 150,000 new cave systems for players on Steam. Since the game launched to early access in 2018, Deep Rock Galactic players have generated and explored well over 500 million unique cave systems. First of all, that is an absolutely astronomical number. I did not think that sort of thing could happen, and it just really goes to show just how many people are actually playing this and how many people go through mission after mission. The fact that this thing is running around the clock and is basically putting together new cave generations, and I'm assuming it's set up in a way that it won't repeat specific combinations, so it is 100% unique all the time. In some ways, you could say that the cave machine is the game's main character. In any case, it's the playmaker and dungeon master, setting the stage for all the rest. It's the one that you thank for the gigantic, dramatic caverns that stretch out into the darkness, as well as the idiotically narrow corridors that cost you the mission when you're rushing to extract. It is with you on every mission, whether it's your first or your millionth. It'll be there as long as Hoxus has mineral to mine, knitting new caves out in the endless dark. So that is a very good thing to note that I never really thought about, is that the cave generator is basically like the dungeon master of this game, because you're kind of at its mercy at any given point, regardless of what mission you're in. And sometimes it's your best friend and it makes the mission very easy. And sometimes it really has it out for you and it just wants you to suffer in every way, shape, or form. Overall, though, I thought that this was a very interesting post that gave me some more serious insight into the cave generation that I'd never really thought of. I knew the system was in depth and I knew that it had some really intricate pieces into it, but I didn't know it was this complex or had this many different layers to it. And this just goes to show that Deep Rock really does have a very unique style of procedural generation that you don't really see in too many games out there today. I know me personally, I'm going to be paying a lot more attention to the caves that I go through from this point forward to see if I can see any kind of repeat in any sort of way, shape, or form, and it's going to be a lot harder for me to tell from this point. And I know that with previous seasons, even including this most recent season, they have added new cave generation options for us to give us even more ways for the caves to be unique. So I cannot wait to see what they decide to do in the future, potentially with more biomes, with even more cave generations. They really do have just an endless toolbox that they can go with this. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed learning more about the cave generation system. I know I did. And hopefully Ghost Ship does more of these below deck posts on a more regular basis, because I love learning more things about this game, and I'm sure you guys will too. And I know I was a little bit delayed with this particular one, but from the rest of them going forward, I'm going to try to be as up to date with them as I possibly can. Anyway, I hope you guys found this video informative and entertaining. If you did, please be sure to give it a like, because it tells me what types of videos you guys want to see. And consider becoming a member today, as it really helps me out a lot. Rocket Stone Miners, I will see you in the next video.